If you were to ask someone on the street, what is a nation? You might hear something like this. It's a country, a land where people share the same language, culture, and history. The response might seem obvious, almost self-evident. But if you press just a little further, has it always been this way? The certainty begins to crack. The truth is far more complex and fascinating. Nations, as we understand them today, are recent inventions, born of particular historical conditions. They are not eternal, nor are they natural. Many of us assume that nations have always existed. We think of ancient Egypt, imperial China, or medieval France as nations in the modern sense. But this is an illusion born of hindsight. We project our current understanding of nationhood onto the past, as though the idea of France existed in the minds of medieval peasants toiling in the fields or merchants traveling from one walled city to another. It did not. They knew of lords, kings, and God, but not France. To them, France was not a bounded, self-contained entity. It was a kingdom, yes, but one more like a network of power and loyalty than a single, unified nation. This projection is a form of historical myopia. By framing empires and kingdoms as proto-nations, we overlook the radical shift that the emergence of nation-states represented. In reality, the pre-modern world was marked by political organizations that thrived on diversity, flexibility, and decentralization rather than the homogeneity and rigidity we now associate with the nation-state. This episode begins with a simple but unsettling proposition. The nation-state is not a natural form of political organization. To see this clearly, we must first understand what came before it, and why those earlier forms of political life were so different. For much of human history, political organization bore little resemblance to the modern nation-states. Empires, kingdoms, city-states, and tribes defined the pre-modern world, and their structure, purpose, and identity diverged sharply from our contemporary notion of the bounded, unified nation. This episode delves into that pre-national world, a world where allegiance, authority, and identity were fluid and layered, and where the concept of a sovereign nation was quite literally unthinkable. Before nation-states, the dominant form of political organization was the empire, and before that, it was the tribe or the clan. Tribes were small, kinship-based groups where loyalty was personal and immediate. Clans operated on a similar principle, but often encompassed larger, loosely affiliated networks. These early forms of political organization were fluid and adaptable, responding to the pressures of survival in a pre-agricultural or early agricultural world. As societies grew more complex, so did their political structures. Empires arose, characterized by their vast territorial reach and the diversity of the population they governed. The empire was a system fundamentally different from the nation-state. Unlike nation-states, empires were expansive and fluid, with borders that shifted according to the tides of conquest, trade, and diplomacy. Their strength lay in their ability to incorporate and govern culturally distinct populations without requiring a unified identity. Think of the Roman Empire, stretching from the sands of North Africa to the misty isles of Britain. The unity of this vast domain did not rest on a shared Roman identity, but on pragmatic mechanisms: military dominance, legal systems, and economic networks. People living in distant provinces didn't see themselves as Romans in the way we think of modern national identities. A merchant in Alexandria and a farmer in Gaul were unlikely to think of themselves as belonging to a singular Roman nation. Instead, they were tied to Rome through citizenship, tribute, or imperial protection. They were citizens, subjects, or vassals, but they did not belong to a nation in the sense we understand it today. Rome's genius lay in its adaptability, its ability to govern a mosaic of peoples under a single administrative framework. This fluidity was not unique to Rome. The Abbasid Caliphate, the Ottoman Empire, and the Mongol Empire similarly governed through a blend of centralized authority and local autonomy. The Chinese Empire during the Tang and Ming dynasties maintained its vast expanse through a combination of bureaucratic efficiency, Confucian ideology, and military strength rather than a shared sense of Chineseness. What held them together was not a national identity, but a shared system of governance, economic interdependence, and the strategic use of power. Even after the collapse of Rome, Europe did not immediately organize itself into nation-states. Instead, it fragmented into feudal systems, loose, overlapping layers of authority. Under feudalism, political authority was decentralized and relational. It was a labyrinth of personal allegiances and fragmented power. A peasant in medieval France might owe allegiance to his local lord, who in turn owed allegiance to a count, who in turn was loyal to a king. But these relationships were not clean or bounded in the way we think of state sovereignty. Sovereignty, as we understand it today, the clear, exclusive authority of a state over its territory and population, was absent. Instead, power was diffuse, negotiated, and often ambiguous. A border was not a fixed, sharp line on a map. It was a murky zone where rival authorities overlapped, each claiming a piece of the local population's labor, taxes, and loyalty. This is what makes the modern nation-state so peculiar. Unlike the fluidity of medieval lordship or the porous frontiers of empires, the nation-state claims total, unambiguous control over its space. It demands that its borders be clear, its authority total, and its people loyal to one and only one political entity. This is a radical departure from the earlier forms of political life, where empires and feudal realms thrived on ambiguity and adaptability. The nation-state thrives on precision and exclusivity. Its borders must be fixed. Its citizens must belong unequivocally. To appreciate the strangeness of the nation-state, consider its insistence on singular allegiance. In a medieval context, it would be inconceivable to demand that a subject owe loyalty to only one ruler and one political entity. The concept of belonging to a single, unified political entity was alien. Authority emanated from multiple sources: the local lord, the church, and the distant king, each with overlapping and competing claims. Yet, the nation-state not only demands singular allegiance, but enforces it through mechanisms like citizenship, passports, and national education system. It replaces the fluid, overlapping allegiances of the past with a rigid, binary framework. You're either within the nation or outside it. The pre-national world challenges many of our assumptions about political organization and identity. It was a world of multiplicity and fluidity, where power was negotiated rather than imposed, and where identities were local, layered, and diverse. By understanding this world, we can better grasp the novelty of the nation-state and the specific historical conditions that gave rise to it. Yet, when we reflect on earlier forms of political organization, empires, kingdoms, city-states, clans, tribes, can we argue that they were, in some ways, more inclusive and reflective of the complex, multifaceted nature of human identity? Of course, these systems were far from ideal and often entailed their own forms of cruelty and exclusion. But then, so do the nation-state. In striving for clarity and order, do we lose something in the process? Something in the richness of human experience that earlier forms of organization, with all its flaws, might have captured more authentically? This episode serves as a foundation for one of the central arguments of this series, that the nation-state is not a natural or inevitable form of political organization. It is a construct, one that emerged in response to the unique pressures and possibilities of modernity. To understand its rise, we must first dismantle the illusion that it has always been with us. Only then can we begin to see the nation-state for what it truly is, a remarkable, contingent, and deeply transformative invention. But when did this radical transformation truly begin? To understand this, we must look back to the Renaissance, a time when the world shifted from a theocentric to an anthropocentric worldview, marking a profound reorientation of human thought. In the theocentric view, the divine was the central reference point for understanding the universe, and human existence was seen as subordinate to the will and order of God. Life's meaning and purpose were anchored in the divine, and earthly concerns were viewed through the lens of spiritual salvation. However, with the rise of the Renaissance, the vision began to shift. Humanity, no longer seen as merely a servant of the divine, became the measure of all things. The human experience, with its capacity for reason, creativity, and self-expression, moved to the center of understanding. This change did not reject the divine, but rather reimagined humanity's place within the cosmos, an awakening to the potential of human agency and the power of individual experience. It was a spiritual shift, one that sparked a new era of intellectual exploration and self-discovery. This shift laid the intellectual and cultural groundwork for the rise of the nation-state. altering not only how we understood the divine and the natural world, but also how we began to conceive ourselves, our societies, and the very idea of political organization. In the next episode, we will explore this seismic shift in worldview and examine how it fundamentally influenced the rise of the nation-states. This shift, which redefined humanity's place in the universe, set the stage for the creation of new political forms that mirrored these changing ideas about individualism, authority, and identity. By delving into this transformation, we can uncover the origins of the modern nation-state and understand the profound ways it has reshaped both the structure of society and our sense of identity.